Yesterday, I did a video on Ron DeSantis's emerging problem as he prepares to run for president of the United States. The problem being more and more competitors are jumping into the GOP field, which is going to make it even more difficult for DeSantis to knock off former President Donald Trump. As everybody is awaiting DeSantis to make his campaign kickoff speech, I thought we'd take a moment and analyze South Carolina Senator Tim Scott's speech, which he gave today, making his announcement that he's running for president in the Republican field. Take a look at some of the clips, give you some positives, give you some negatives. So hang on, folks. We're going to get into all this in just 1 second. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk. Now, as I said, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott today gave his presidential campaign kickoff speech, and I thought we'd do an analysis of it. Start off with the basics. For my part, I thought it was a very good speech. There's one thing you can say about Tim Scott for sure. He is a very gifted public speaker, and his talents were on full display today. It was a good, solid speech. He and his speech writing staff, working from the assumption he was even using one, put together a really good 40-minute campaign speech. And there is one thing that kind of struck me interesting about it. It was different in tone. To be perfectly honest, it almost felt like I was going to a church revival meeting. Now, that's not a criticism, so please do not misunderstand me. But as opposed to most standard political campaign kickoff speeches, this one was definitely different in tone, especially in that particular area. There was a lot of quotations from the Bible that were thrown in. And again, not a criticism, it's just different. And I thought it was a very nice touch personally. Um, as I say, Scott is a very gifted public speaker. As a matter of fact, he got off some great lines in here, and most of them are built around the idea of contrast. I mean, for example, one of the lines that stood out to me was, "Our values are strong, but our president is weak. We are the land of opportunity, not the land of oppression. In regard to education, less CRT, more ABCs." And then finally, on the question of border control, if you can't control the back door, do you really own the house? Again, great lines. They really got the crowd involved. They got everybody engaged. And again, that was one of the things I thought was very good about the speech. The personal contact, the personal connection that Tim Scott had with his audience. As far as themes are concerned, there were two of them that really stood out more than anything else. Tim Scott kept setting up a contrast of how we as America are currently in retreat, be it we are retreating from success or aspiration or excellence or heritage or history. And the other theme that stood out in the speech was how he, as president, wanted to make the rungs of the ladder strong and make sure they remain strong so that individuals and a nation can climb to higher and better things. I thought that was a very nice touch with regard to the speech. Overall, as I said, it's very friendly, it's very engaging. This crowd was very much into Tim Scott's speech and what he had to say. Now, you sort of expect that with a political campaign speech. But this was a little bit different. You could tell this crowd was very, very in tune to Scott. It felt like a very personal kind of a gathering. Um, Tone was excellent. There were a lot of family and personal references that he brought in, um, you know, to show how it affected his growing up, how it affected his policy decisions for what he currently wants to do today. Another aspect, again, I said that, there were a lot of Bible verses quoted, but one thing that was definitely permeated throughout the speech was Tim Scott's personal faith. I want to play you a clip of that just to give you an idea of what that felt like, what it sounded like. So give me just a second and I will get this pulled up. Take a listen to this. Very interesting comment.
Security needs starts on our border, but it doesn't end there. We have spent decades getting deeper and deeper into debt to the Chinese Communist Party. Their goal is not just to surpass us, their goal is to beat us. I'm reminded of a Bible verse, Proverbs 22:7, that says, borrower is slave to the lender. It goes beyond our finances, though. It's about our supply chains. It's about medicines and microchips and critical minerals. It's about China buying American farmland, infiltrating our airspace, and tracking our kids. It's about President Xi siding with Putin and Iran. America can win this competition, but Joe Biden cannot.
Now, you see what I mean by the fact that Tim Scott's faith, his application of the Bible to present day. I thought this was done beautifully as far as rhetorical technique. I thought it was done very, very well, very nicely put together. And frankly, as I said a moment ago, I think this is different than most standard campaign kickoff speeches. And honestly, I think it's a nice touch. I think it's something that's needed. I'm not saying I necessarily want every politician running for office, to do what Tim Scott did here today. But on the whole, this was a refreshing change. This was something that's different than what you normally see. And honestly, I think it's healthy. I think it's very good. Now, those are the pluses. As far as the minuses, there are two or three small things I had problems with, but there's one big one that I'm definitely going to save for last. The first one is something that was beyond Tim Scott's control. About 20 minutes into the speech, the sound went out. I mean, literally, not only could you not hear what he was saying, the microphones went out, everything went out for like a good minute and a half. So it kind of made for a little bit of an awkward situation. Maybe blunted the momentum of the speech just a little bit, but honestly, it didn't hurt it that much. The other things that I noticed, and this is a criticism I guess I have of every orator, everybody thinks that they're Martin Luther King Jr. And toward the end of the speech, he was really trying to press that. In other words, that part of the speech felt forced. I mean, I think it's about maybe the 33, 34-minute mark of a 40-minute speech. And it just felt like he was trying to, get that MLK Jr. vibe going, which honestly to me isn't necessary. I mean, I think Tim Scott is such an orator. He doesn't need to try to impersonate anyone else, try to channel the gifts of MLK. No, just be yourself. So I thought that was a little bit hokey. I thought it was a little bit forced. There was one other thing, and I will show a clip for this. This is one of those moments where I felt like, Tim Scott was like going back to the groove yard of forgotten GOP favorites. I want you to listen to this, and then I'm going to make a comment on it. So give me just a second, and I'll get this pulled up.
But America cannot be safe or secure if we sink into a cultural quicksand here at home. As president, I will rebuild and restore every rung of the ladder that helped me climb. Because I want my story to pale in comparison to your stories. As president, I will motivate, inspire, and require every able-bodied citizen to take responsibility and go to work.
Now, here's my problem with this. This goes back to the 1990s. This goes back to, the days of Marvin Olasky's book, The Tragedy of American Compassion, which Newt Gingrich drew upon when he was drawing up parts of the Contract with America. And honestly, it seems a little bit silly that this is a stated goal. Of course we want everyone in America to work. That's the whole point of the proposition. The more hands that pull the rope, the easier it is for the wagon to move. But why you're even bringing this up, I don't know. And honestly, from my perspective, it seems to me you're relying on a GOP trope to maybe mask the fact that you're not as well versed on the current issues affecting the country as you might otherwise should be as a presidential candidate. I mean, you're focusing on the question of, I want everybody to work. Well, how about the fact that we've got supply chains that are a huge problem? What about the fact that, we've got fentanyl coming in the country? What about the fact that we have policies in place that are creating disincentives to work? It's easy to say, yeah, I want everyone to work. But do you really understand the dynamics and the issues that are causing that problem to happen? Just a little bit worrisome for me. Um, there is one last thing, and I think this is my biggest problem with parts of this speech. On issues that Tim Scott would lay out, things that he wants to do something about, he talking about border security, that he would go after the cartels, talking about rebuilding the military, talking about opportunity zones, talking about other issues. Well, a lot of this sounded like stuff that either Donald Trump had done as president or he has staked out a position on as a candidate running again for the presidency. So the question becomes, how are you really different than Donald Trump? Now, maybe this issue gets fleshed out the further along that we go into the campaign and Tim Scott starts laying out positions, trying to build that kind of contrast. But if he can't create the contrast up front between himself and Donald Trump, he's got a problem. It's kind of like Bill Maher's great comment. When he was talking about DeSantis specifically, he said, why pay the money to go see a tribute band when you can lay down the ticket and go see the real thing? Well, that's what a lot of these guys are going to be, whether it's DeSantis, Tim Scott, or anybody else. They're going to lay out positions that Donald Trump has already addressed either while he was in office or now he's a candidate again for the same office. So these guys, particularly Tim Scott, are going to have to figure out real fast how to differentiate themselves from the Donald. But again, summing it all up, I thought it was a solid speech. I thought it was good. And again, Tim Scott is a formidable public speaker. I'm going to be very interested to see what happens when he gets on stage with his fellow GOP nominees, particularly Ron DeSantis. Now, whether Donald Trump participates in these debates or not is up in the air. I think that would be interesting to see Trump, DeSantis, and Tim Scott on the same stage together. But particularly if it's DeSantis and Tim Scott, that's going to make for a fascinating contrast because honestly, for all of Ron DeSantis' skills as a politician, he's not that good on a debate stage, to be perfectly honest. And Tim Scott is very smooth. So that's going to make for a really interesting dynamic the further along we get into this thing. But those are my thoughts on it. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do so. Number two, please hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure that you're always aware when we've got new material coming out. Number three, if you have friends that you think would enjoy this, please share this video around. It would really help me out an awful lot. Leave a comment below. And finally, as always, please give me a thumbs up on the video. You have no idea how that little action helps out someone like me. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative, and I'll see you next time.